Imagine you are standing in the middle of a forest so dense that the canopy above chokes out the sun, leaving the world below in a permanent, sickly twilight. You've been hiking for hours, following a trail that was clearly marked on your map, but suddenly, the path simply vanishes beneath a carpet of dead, black leaves that seem to swallow the sound of your footsteps. The birds have stopped singing. The wind has died down to a deathly, unnatural calm. And in the center of a perfectly circular clearing, where the trees look twisted as if they grew in constant agony, you find it. A massive, intricate spiral made of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of small animal bones, ribs, vertebrae, and skulls, all bleached to a haunting porcelain white and polished as if by human hands. You tell yourself it's just a strange art project, a prank by some local teenager with too much time on his hands. But then you notice a single black crow's feather standing perfectly upright in the exact center of the spiral, and you see a drop of dark red marrow still leaking from a fresh break in a deer's femur. That's when you hear it, your own voice whispering from the shadows directly behind your ear saying, "Don't go yet, I'm not finished with you." If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in storytelling format, then you have come to the right place. We post stories just like this one every single week. So if that is of interest to you, please find the like button's favorite pair of waterproof hiking boots and fill them with fast-drying industrial cement right before they head out on a 20-mile trek into the deepest, most forbidden part of the wilderness. Before we get into the chilling details of today's story, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Today's story takes us to the sprawling, ancient forests of Massachusetts, an area known for a complicated history of strange disappearances, ancient stone structures, and unsettling events that defy every known law of logic and science. Our main character is a man named Leo. Now, Leo wasn't a novice. He was a seasoned hiker, a man who found more peace in the whisper of wind through pine needles than in the noise of any city street. He was the kind of person who kept a meticulous log of his travels, knew how to read the clouds like a book, and could track a deer across dry rock. He certainly didn't believe in the campfire tales about monsters lurking in what the locals call the Forbidden Triangle. To Leo, the woods were a sanctuary, not a graveyard. But on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, the forest decided to show Leo that some legends aren't just stories, they are warnings written in blood. Leo had hiked nearly 15 miles into the backcountry, moving deeper into a sector that most hikers avoid because the compasses tend to spin erratically there. He planned to spend 2 nights completely off the grid, seeking the kind of silence that only the deep woods can provide. The first day was idyllic. The air was crisp, the leaves were a riot of orange and gold, and he felt a profound sense of solitude. He set up his camp near a small, nameless creek and watched the stars emerge. But as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, the entire atmosphere shifted. The temperature didn't just drop, it plummeted, and the forest fell into what we call an oppressive silence. Every cricket, every rustle of wind, every natural sound simply ceased to exist. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind that makes you feel like the trees are leaning in, holding their breath just to hear your heartbeat. That night, Leo was woken up at exactly 3:33 a.m. by a single, sharp twig snap right outside his tent. It was a sound so deliberate, it felt like a knock on a door. He sat perfectly still, his hand gripping his hunting knife, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He expected to hear the heavy breathing of a bear or the scuffle of a coyote, but all he heard in return was a low, rhythmic humming. It wasn't a human voice, and it wasn't a machine. It was a guttural, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground through his sleeping pad, and directly into the bones of his legs. It felt less like a sound and more like a physical weight pressing down on the tent. He stayed awake until the first gray light of dawn, staring at the thin nylon walls, terrified that if he blinked, whatever was outside would find its way in. The next morning, Leo tried to shake off his fear. He told himself it was just infrasound or a vivid dream brought on by the thin mountain air. But as he packed his gear and continued toward his next waypoint, he realized the forest was no longer familiar. The trees looked different, grayer, taller, with branches that looked like reaching fingers. And then he found the grove. It was a stand of pines that looked as if they had been scorched, though there was no sign of fire. In the center sat a large, flat-topped granite boulder, and on top of it was that perfect, intricate spiral of animal bones. As Leo stepped closer, he realized the bones were arranged by size and type, creating a hypnotic pattern that seemed to pulse in his vision. A wave of cold nausea washed over him as he saw a small pendant, a silver locket, resting near the edge of the spiral. He recognized it. It belonged to a hiker who had gone missing in these woods 3 years ago. He realized then that the humming he heard at night wasn't a sound of nature, it was the sound of something building this altar. He felt watched by unseen eyes from the dark, lightless spaces between the trees. Every instinct he had as a survivalist told him one thing: run. He didn't pack his gear with his usual care. He shoved everything into his bag with frantic, shaking hands and practically sprinted back the way he came. But the forest began to warp around him. The landmarks he had passed only hours before a fallen log, a specific rock formation, were gone, replaced by thickets of thorns that seemed to grow across the path as he watched. Every time he paused to catch his breath, he saw it in his peripheral vision. A pale, spindly shape moving with a jerky, unnatural gait far too fast for any living creature. It was easily 9 feet tall, its gray skin stretched so tight over its skeletal frame that it looked like wet parchment, and its eyes, they weren't eyes at all, but hollow, black pits of endless, starving hunger. The horror wasn't just in the creature's appearance. It was in the way it used sound as a weapon. The thing began to mimic Leo's own heavy, shuddering breaths, echoing them back to him from the trees. When Leo stumbled over a root, the creature let out a wet, guttural laugh that sounded like a serrated blade tearing through thick leather. It began to call his name, not in its own voice, but in the voice of his younger brother, then in the voice of a crying child, and finally, it used Leo's own voice to scream for help, using the exact same words Leo had whispered to himself just minutes before. Leo didn't stop. He pushed himself past the point of exhaustion, his lungs feeling like they were filled with broken glass and fire. He finally burst through the final stretch of trees, stumbling onto the gravel of the parking lot. Dia scrambled into his car, fumbling with the keys, his eyes darting to the tree line where he saw the pale figure standing perfectly still, watching him. He locked the doors and drove like a madman, not stopping until he reached a crowded diner 3 towns away, where the bright fluorescent lights and the smell of grease finally made the world feel real again. But the story doesn't end there. Search and rescue teams, acting on Leo's frantic report, went back to that grove 2 days later. They found the granite boulder, but the bone spiral had vanished as if it had never existed. There were no tracks, no blood, and no sign of a struggle. In the center of the boulder, however, they found a single handheld camera, Leo's camera, the one he swore was buried deep in his backpack when he reached his car. When the authorities played the footage, there was no video of Leo's hike. There was only 30 minutes of a wet, clicking sound coming from inside a dark underground space, followed by a voice that sounded exactly like the lead investigator, speaking in a low, intimate whisper. "I can taste your fear, Leo." The spiral is almost complete, and I'm coming home. There is a theory among the deep dive communities on Reddit that the Wendigo doesn't just hunt for meat. It marks its prey. Once you lay eyes on the bone spiral, you've been invited to a ritual where you are the only guest and the only item on the menu. But the real bone-chilling question is this. If Leo truly made it out of those woods that morning, why did his brother call the police last night, crying, claiming he heard Leo's voice whispering through the air vents of their house, saying that the marrow in his bones was finally ripe for the harvest? Imagine you are a park ranger stationed in a remote corner of the Pacific Northwest, a place so vast and dense that the sunlight barely touches the forest floor, even at noon. You've spent years patrolling these trails, and you think you know every sound the wilderness can make. But then, during a routine patrol near an area locals call the Whistling Woods, you hear a sound that makes your blood turn to ice. It's not the wind, and it's not an animal. It is a human whistle, perfectly clear, coming from the top of a 200-foot pine tree where no human could possibly be. You look up, and for a split second, you see a face peering down at you, a face that looks like a human skull wrapped in wet, gray paper, with eyes that are nothing but hollow pits of hunger. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in storytelling format, then you have come to the right place. We post stories just like this one every single week. So, if that's of interest to you, please find the like button's favorite hiking boots and fill them with fast-drying cement right before they head out on a 10-mile trek. Before we get into today's story, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Today's story is about a park ranger named David. Now, David wasn't a rookie. He had over 12 years of experience working in some of the most isolated national forests in North America. He was the kind of guy who could track a mountain lion over dry rock and knew exactly which birds were chirping just by the rhythm of their song. But in 2019, David was transferred to a sector that even the veteran rangers avoided. It was a valley deep in the wilderness known officially as Sector 4. But unofficially, everyone called it the Whistling Woods. The legends about this place were as old as the trees themselves. Local tribes refused to hunt there, claiming the land was starving. They spoke of a creature, a Wendigo that was born from greed and cannibalism, a spirit that could never be full, no matter how much it ate. David, being a man of science and protocol, dismissed these as campfire tales used to keep hikers on the marked trails. But on his very first week, the forest decided to introduce itself. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. David was checking a series of trail cameras when the forest went into what we call an oppressive silence. In the world of a park ranger, silence is a massive red flag. It means every bird, squirrel, and insect has suddenly realized there is a predator nearby. David stopped, his hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. And then he heard it. A whistle. It was a long, low, trilling sound that seemed to vibrate in his very chest. It sounded like someone trying to get his attention from a distance. David called out, thinking a hiker might be off trail and injured. But there was no answer, only the whistle again, this time coming from directly behind him. He spun around, but the forest was empty. He checked his trail cameras later that night, and what he saw made him question his own sanity. The cameras had captured a blur, a pale, spindly shape moving with a jerky, unnatural gait that was far too fast for any human. In one frame, the creature was staring directly into the lens. It was easily 9 feet tall, its ribs pushing through its translucent skin, and it had no lips, just a row of jagged, yellowed teeth perpetually exposed in a horrific, frozen grin. A few nights later, David was in his lookout tower, perched 60 feet above the ground, when he heard a scratching on the glass. He turned his flashlight toward the window, and his heart nearly stopped. The creature was there, clinging to the side of the tower like an insect. It wasn't using the ladder. It was gripping the steel beams with claw-like fingers that were nearly a foot long. But the most terrifying part wasn't how it looked, it was what it did next. The creature opened its jagged mouth and spoke. It used David's own voice, using the exact words he had spoken into his radio earlier that day. "Everything is green up here, Ben. Weather's holding." David backed away, clutching his radio, his breath coming in, ragged gasps. He realized then that this thing wasn't just a predator, it was a mimic. It was learning him. It was waiting for him to break. He stayed in that tower until dawn, listening to the creature circle the cabin, whistling that same low trilling tune over and over again. When the sun finally rose, the creature was gone, but it had left a parting gift on the catwalk outside. It was a pile of old, rusted hiking gear, boots, a backpack, and a compass, all belonging to a hiker who had vanished in that forest 10 years prior. David quit the Forest Service the next day. He didn't file a formal report because he knew no one would believe him. He moved to a city miles away from the nearest tree line, but he still doesn't sleep in the dark. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows just right through the vents of his apartment, he hears it. A faint, low whistle. There is a theory among those who study these encounters on Reddit that once a Wendigo has your voice, it has a tether to you. It doesn't matter how far you run. It's just a matter of time before you follow the whistle back into the dark. But the question remains, if David is so terrified of the woods, why did his neighbors report seeing him walking toward the nearest forest at 3 a.m. last week, whistling a tune he's never sung before?